All right, so welcome to our talk. What's awesome about the Drupal 8 plugin system? So I am Michael Nolan from Serium Software LLC. So real fast history. So as a Drupal user, I am auditory.mike. I have been involved on Drupal.org for over 12 years. I got really active about 5 years ago when I started doing Drupal professionally for a few companies. Serium Software is a small startup that I've also been doing for a few years, and recently I've started getting into what I call platform development. So that is, you can take a Drupal multi-site and a distribution, and then you can serve a similar kind of expected functionality to multiple clients. So we focus on education, on research, and on cases where you need to deliver very specific content in a repeatable way for a number of clients. So, what is awesome about the Drupal 8 plugin system? So I'm going to say what's awesome in one side, but first I want to ask, has anyone here worked with developing a plugin before? Cool. So in what context, what were you doing with the plugin?
Just like plug and play functionality. Let's say I need to have a blog doing something. So it is getting its stock data from the feed and it is throwing it on the front end using a blog. So I created a plugin for that.
Oh, cool. So kind of like a little content plugin.
Yeah. Very
nice. And yeah, and actually that's actually one pretty good example of it. So a few of them I put in here. So you can architect feature growth from the start of a project. So exactly, if you have a content getter, would be one example of that you may need to change that over time. You can also unify interfaces with dynamic features. So these are cases like admin pages or different types of assignments in which most everything is to a standard, but then there's one piece of custom logic you need to fill it out. So instead of having to create multiple dashboards, you can actually unify the dashboards using the plugin system. You can also do user selectable access and functions. So what that means is sometimes you have cases where for different content you need to do different things. And also, quick show of hands, how many people have ever been on a project where you're 80% of the way through, and then all of a sudden the client or stakeholder is like, hey, wait, can we get it to do this one extra thing, which, by the way, is going to make you re-architect your entire project? Yeah. Every project? Yeah. And so what we're going to be talking about here is cases like that. So this gets into what I like to call project scalability. If you know that there's an actual industry term for this, let me know for sure, because it's one of those cases I just kind of coined it as I went. So when I say project scalability, let me first of all explain one thing. So the typical meaning of scalability is we think about, we do a project, we get it to work, look nice, and then scaling means you get more and more people in. And scaling is usually in an infrastructure context of, okay, what do I have to do with cache layers, servers, databases, get it all arranged so that I can get a lot of people in. And the thing here, though, is that from a project perspective, that also assumes that what you're doing at the beginning is also what you're going to be doing later on. So when I say project scalability, it's a little bit different kind of image, but the idea is you may start with one kind of person, but you could have different kind of people, or you could have different clients that are mostly the same, and then you have these different roles, different functions, and so the project itself changes over time. So it's your ability to scale in the sense of, if you have a very maintainable, flexible project, you can then take on more clients, or you can do more things for the same clients, so you can continue to drive value beyond just driving in numbers. So with scaling project growth, examples of what that looks like, it could be you're doing one site to a multi-site, and one example of that is a project I do called ERC 360. That is National Science Foundation has what's called the Engineering Research Center program. So every center 90% of their work has to do with filling out particular reports. So in this case, we're going from one site to a multi-site where everyone needs mostly the same things. You may also have a situation of one to multiple use cases, and one thing I like working with is Drupal web forms, and as you know, you can do a lot of things with custom forms. And in some cases, though, like you may have workflows and bits and pieces of it change, so it's also how do you handle all these use cases, like I said, with a unified administration. And then lastly, in the same user interface, you may need to change features over time, like you may need to change how you're doing your content. You may have from like one feed to multiple feeds. Like all of these things change in projects over time, so how can we kind of architect from the beginning a way to flexibly handle all of them? So I'm going to give two examples, and I kind of like weave this through my talk for what I'm going to be talking about. So first one is called Flashpoint Education. So that is at drupal.org/project/flashpoint. That is a module suite. And the use case I have there is I do have a Flashpoint Education website. So this was a kind of like online professional development that we're starting to do. And this can include courses as marketing content. So in an earlier talk, I learned the term evergreen content. Unfortunately, too late to put it on this slide. But that's the idea of, okay, like I make a course, but like I can change the front end to say, okay, give me your email first, or do some other thing first, and then we'll give you the course. Or we have company onboarding. So this is you hire someone new, and it's like, real quick, how can I get them the information they need? And actually, this is the inspiration for the project. Years ago, when I was a scientist, for example, we had a problem we call an expertise walking out of the door because no one knew how to use the machines. I'm like, why don't we just record a video of somebody who knows doing it, and then we won't forget. And sure enough, you know, I think those YouTube videos like we're still using, you know, years after I'm gone. So that's company onboarding. Also customer onboarding. So you may have a new product, and the thing is, you do the training, and the person's kind of looking like, yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense. And then you leave, and then like, I have no idea what he said. And so you may want to have some resources for them after the fact to make it so that they can self-teach again if they need to. Last case for courses, online certification. So in this case, you need an LRS and you need to generate certificates. And the thing is, these are all courses, they're all informational content you put in front of people. How do you handle all these different use cases? So that is kind of like the core question for this project. And even better, can you do it as platform as a service and say, oh, hey, I've got my platform, I'll white label it to you. Case number two, this is Niobe Research Center. So this is kind of a research-related software, so reporting, labs, and again, onboarding for grad students, because I just remember as a grad student myself, you come in, you're totally clueless. And along with that is a module we recently became maintainers of, which was the task module, so you can assign tasks to people. And I realized, like, you know, in a typical research environment, like, there are a lot of very different things you got to assign people to. And inside of the system, part of task is you can render buttons, which are action buttons, to say, okay, I did the task, or I need help with this task, or I'm not doing this task for whatever reason. And so, but that changes per assignment context. So now we need a way to say, okay, how can we handle all these different cases, but without having to say, it's like, okay, here's this list of tasks, this list of tasks, and by the time you're done, you have a dashboard with like 50 lists on it. So it's how do we handle those sort of things. And also as well, Niobe Research Center has a application and scholarship manager, so you apply to scholarships and grants. Part of it is there is a decision logic in there for reviewers to give decisions. And the thing is, again, that changes even per application content. So how to vary it and yet at the same time provide just one dashboard. So answer for that, all of this is the Drupal Annotation plugin. So this is a little bit smaller than just a module, but it's more than just one function. So annotation plugins are prepackaged functionality and configuration. So A plugin is going to be a PHP class with defined methods. Annotation is just PHP annotations. That is data you put in the document block above that class. So if you remember Drupal 7, you remember the hook system. And it's like that in the sense of you can register plugins just like you registered hooks. But it's better because, one, you can specify execution criteria, a lot of automation there. You can add extra methods into your class when you need to. And then also, a nice part of PSR4 is, remember with Drupal 7 hooks, you had to throw everything into the .module file. And I remember some of the more popular modules would have like 3,000 line of code module files. It's like, where is the function I'm looking for? And whereas for PSR4, it's like, okay, what plugins does this thing implement? And I just open the SRC plugins folder, and it's all listed out super clean. It's really nice. So for what the annotation plugin looks like, so this is an example from a module that I have maintained called Views Add Button. Views Add Button is in the Views module. If you need to just render a button that adds content and you need to do the access route checking, all that, this module will handle it all for you. So this is actually the declaration of the add button in the field context. So as we can see, we have the class. So add button field extends the base plugin class. And then also we see this @views field. So every annotation plugin has a name. Now for how to create a plugin, I will actually give you guys a link to a guide at the end. But for how they're defined, so they have 4 classes. There is the plugin manager, which defines the location and namespace. The interface class, that defines the core functions, which if you use a program like PHP Storm, that interface class will tell you, PHP Storm can then tell you from the interface class, like, okay, this is what you can do with this thing. The annotation gives the name of the plugin itself. So when you say @myplugin, that means there will be a myplugin.php. And then finally the controller, which actually does the loading within Drupal. The other thing that connects that controller is you register a service in your module, so it'll be plugin.manager.myplugin. And that is something you can then call. And one thing I also want to mention before I go one more step, those files, what's good is those all tend to be in the same places in every module. So again, I just have to say, Drupal 8 is so much easier to know what's going on in modules now, because everything is in these like cleanly named files, and it's all according to a standard. You can actually figure it out, and I will tell you, months have been saved on projects for me already with this. But yeah, so to call a plugin is very simple. So you call a plugin manager by going to Drupal service, and then you call the same service that you registered. Then you get the plugin definitions by calling the getDefinitions function. And that plugin definitions array is going to be keyed by plugin ID. So I give this example at the bottom for an @myplugin. So that one is, the ID is called taco plugin. And so in that case, when you have your definition list, there will be an array key that has a key taco plugin. Very simple. And then what will happen is each plugin will have the class and the annotation data. So like the example I give here, we have ID, label, and favorite food. So that will be, the first key is that taco plugin, and then it will give an array with this exact same data in it. So you can also have a very flexible way to declare data within your annotation plugin, depending on what you're planning to use when you make it. So the use cases for plugins, there are 3 that I've used so far that are pretty common. First one is a case like you loop through all of them, and this is especially the case for certain access plugins that you may want to make sure, like I have a whole checklist of conditions, or with settings forms. Next, you can select them with automatic logic, so you can have kind of a little algorithm that you build and say, okay, the first item that matches the criteria, use that, or the best match for the criteria, use that. Or you can even just do as simple as like, okay, for every bundle, I'm going to register a plugin that says extra functions I want to put on that entity bundle. So for nodes, maybe for like certain content types, you want to be able to like have within PHP like a function class you can call You can do that with plugins. Finally, you've got user selection, and that is a case where you don't really know per case what you need to do, so let's just ask the user to set it for us, and as you can guess, that's role-based context. So you can say, okay, on the admin page, let the person pick how they want their site to behave, or sometimes even per content, you can do that. So I'm going to give a couple of examples of each. So for the all plugins example, I have a plugin in my Flashpoint module called @Flashpoint Settings. And so what happens is Flashpoint Education actually in the admin bar will render its own section. And when you click on Flashpoint, it will take you to the settings page to say globally how will the course system work. And so every time you enable a module, each module will actually add a tab to this menu. So for example, like the one I've got selected there is the access code. So it's like enter an access code and you get this thing. And so what's nice about that is then you have a flexible administrative area, but you can keep it all on one page. Or if you want to do kind of like a menu hook setup, you can specify, okay, I'll base tabs based on the plugins. So again, project settings form. So this, again, like every time you need to specify a behavior that may change, you can do your @project settings. Another thing I'm looking at doing potentially is plugin documentation. So you kind of like build that in as a part of your plugin. So that would be a get documentation function within it. And then in that case, the help page is, okay, I'm just going to say everything that uses this plugin, here's what it does. Now, automatic logic. So now this was that task module we were talking about earlier. So I'm looking at an application review case. So when we give people reviews, there are a few things that happen. First, different tasks have different options for what you need to do. And then the other case is, for this one, we're looking at just review tasks, but review tasks are context aware. If you have a review task, but then someone takes it out of review, so they move it to the final decision stage, or they promote it to another workflow in which the person needs to fill out more information, we don't want them to review. So in this case, we have what's called the task bundle plugin. So for each type of task, there is a link generation function. And so in that case, I can say, okay, for my review task bundle, check the status of the application being reviewed, and if it matches, render these 3 colorful buttons here. And if it is not the case, just render a red dismiss button, which means it's not active, and if you don't want to see this message anymore, you can dismiss it. The other thing too is this red, yellow, green set here, it's also context aware, so when the person actually does the review, it will also remove those links. So that way they don't submit multiple reviews. So automatic plugin logic, again, per entity type or per bundle logic, so for all nodes, or in my case for the application system for all application entities, or all task entities. So if you have a plugin that is dependent on certain fields within that, it's a good way to like make it apply to all things. You can also throw in like what I describe as situational awareness. So again, task is status aware, or for various workflows, you can have condition-specific things that you declare through a plugin. So you can say, load this plugin only if we're at this point of the workflow. Last of these 3 use cases is the user select plugin. So this is a case that you can work with the field API or with the form API. And so in this case, I have Flashpoint access. So it's like, when do people access this course? So free access is easy. Anyone can see it. You have manual access, which means I have to manually approve you. And then you see also have this integration with the group module where you define communities and say, oh, if you join my subscriber community, I will give you this set of courses. So it's kind of like, hey, let's get together, talk about Drupal, and if you're a member of my Drupal group, then you get free Drupal courses. So you can do those kinds of things with a user select API. You can also change the way stuff renders. So I have like a render array generator and say, okay, like if I want tabs, then I'll do like the tab base. If I just want a giant list or a table, like I can flip it out that way. So again, field API, form API, and this is most useful, I think, for per content behavior or for cases where like the admin settings is one thing and you need to like override it for a specific case. I definitely make use of that. And it's just any case where you need to make those changes at that level. Last one I want to mention too is also for REST API. I have kind of like a very simple statement database I use for an LRS. And one of the things I'm like, oh, like I may need to change that API in the future. I'm like, oh, well, I'll just make my endpoints, the ID of that into a plugin. And then what happens is to call the plugin is just the plugin ID is the endpoint. So it'll be, in that case, it's called Spectra. So it's like Spectra / plugin ID / get post, for example.
So you're saying instead of calling REST API any endpoints, we can use the plugin and make it return as a description the REST endpoint data.
Yeah, so what happens is, so for Drupal routing, so go back to this. So for Drupal's route parameters in Drupal 8, you can make the plugin ID a route parameter. Mm-hmm. So in that case, you're really creating a single route, and then what happens is you pass in that parameter, you call the plugins, and then, okay, from my plugin definitions, I've got my route parameter, I'll match it to that one in the array keys, and then at that point I have it. And then also if someone tries to like mess with that by entering something different, then it'll fail because they've entered something invalid.
So let's suppose I need to load a, let's say, node, different type of node, and I am using block code, so I can call that plugin where I can load that node.
Exactly.
Using plugin. But instead of that, I can also directly call the REST API of the node. Like the REST API for you. But this is the alternate of that, right?
Right. So in my case, like I said, so this one is a statement database. So what happens is sometimes there's other processing that needs to go on.
Yeah.
So if you can imagine for an import that also needs to do entity references, what's happening when you call that plugin is saying like, hey, call the extra functionality to do the entity reference, for example. Cool. So that is kind of the explanation of what the plugin systems are. So now I'm going to loop back and say, okay, now here is how I've used them for these different use cases. So looking at Flashpoint again, so again, course rendering, course pass criteria, and then also certificate options, those are all plugin powered. And reason for that is because there's one project I'm looking at a Drupal 8 upgrade. Now remember, this is one of those like, hey, can you change this kind of deals? Well, it turned out one of them was the certificate logic, because at first it's like, okay, we're going to just have someone passes the course, we print this certificate, and we have a global setting. But then someone's like, oh, but actually for this context, I need this one, and then for this other context, I need another one. And at first we said, okay, we'll use taxonomy terms to do that, but then they're like, oh, actually, I need something even outside of the taxonomy terms. I need even more. And pretty soon, like, the number of fields in this taxonomy like starts growing and growing. So I'm like, in this case, no, like let's instead do the plugins so that way we can actually like call different components so that it expands as we need to, and we make it very simple with the logic. To say, okay, like every course will do the default, but for like the 3% that are different and need all this custom logic, like we don't need to bring that in for all the other ones. And then for our Niobe task case, so like I was saying, so application decisions are selectable plugins. So that is a very specific application workflow where we have nomination, application, review, and then final decision. And so what happens now for the final decision is when we set up an application, we'll say, okay, what are the decisions you need? Some workflows are multi-stage. So you have like first, second round applications. So in that case, we need a promote decision. Or there's other cases in which we'll say close and send the person a message. Some of them, I remember one is as complex as like, you like print out information to contact their local newspaper because it's a really big award. And So what happens is, it's just for that workflow, the choices that are relevant for that application at that point, we just render. It's like, okay, here's your 3 decisions. Which one do you want to do? And then at that point, if the decision allows it, even the end user can see, okay, this is the decision. Here is the data that was allowed to be exposed to me, so I can see any feedback if I'm allowed feedback. If not, we can let the reviewer specify the feedback. And so again, we can handle a very wide variety. And again, for the tasks, we have now a unified checklist. So we can now say, okay, every active task, it flows to the top of this list, even though the task can be radically different. I'm trying to think, maybe the closest example to this is if you've worked with like some project management tools, you can have either like different workflows or different statuses as people check stuff off. So now, like I said, now we have like one interface so that people can kind of just come in and see it really quick. This is what I need to do. So main takeaways, once again, from the beginning. So with the plugin system, if you know you need growth and flexibility in a part of your application or your site you're building, you can architect that feature growth at the beginning. So this is whenever you need custom functionality, so you need to change what your PHP is going to do down the road, you can architect that growth with the plugin system. You can also scale from one project to a variety, because if you know, okay, like here's the 80-90% of features that are the same, here's the 10% that change per client. If you can put as much as you can into either configuration-based or plugin-based customizations, it's very easy to ship for a relatively large number of clients. And I think it's also for smaller shops, it's even a way to punch above your weight, you could say. Because now everything is highly maintainable. You can simplify your UIs. So again, single admin dashboards, or simpler documentation, or simpler dashboards for end users. You can do that. But the key is, at the end of the day, we're trying to deliver maintainable code for the maximum customer satisfaction. Because that is, at the end of the day, we want to say for our users, for the people who are kind of like mid-level admins, we just want to make this a simple, scalable, maintainable project that we can do for everyone that we're trying to serve. So that is everything I wanted to just say about how awesome this system is, and like I said, how it can help with the growth of your projects or even your organization. Also, you can get these slides in a how-to plugins guide. So this is flashpointeducation.com/free Drupal talks. I currently also have 2 open access courses available on the courses page there. And if you've got any more questions for it, please feel free to reach out to me, and I would be glad to talk about this and any project ideas or needs that you have. Thank you.